Welcome to Unbox Your World, the podcast where philosophy meets tech. In each episode, we're connecting the dots between philosophy, technology, society, science, and progressive thought. And together with brilliant minds across the world who dare to challenge the way we think and live in today's society, we are unboxing our minds one episode at a time. I am Maria Salting. I am a tech professional during the day and a philosopher at night. So let's get started. Let's unbox ourselves. Welcome back to Unbox Your World. In today's episode, we are interviewing Dr. Brennan Jacoby, who is a philosopher and the founder of Philosophy at Work, which is a collective of philosophers, business psychologists, authors, and practitioners who are teaching the skills that professionals need to think their best. Brennan also holds a Ph.D. in philosophy, and he is specifically specialized in the philosophy of trust. So today, we will dig into what trust means, the philosophy of trust, and what this then also means in the context of blockchain. Can technology really help us solve and scale human trust? And can technology ever replace human trust? Well, these are some of the topics that we will discuss today. So tune in and let's get started. Hello, Brennan Jacoby. Welcome to Unbox Your World.
Thank you, Maria. It's so good to be here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I'm likewise. It's going to be very interesting to hear all your philosophical thoughts.
Pleasure.
So yeah, let's get started. So you are the founder of Philosophy at Work. So the question is then, in your opinion, why do you think that we need philosophy at work? And especially how could tech companies benefit from having more philosophers working for them?
Yeah, right. So Philosophy at Work, I mean, maybe it's useful, first of all, to say that Philosophy at Work is a collective of people with backgrounds in philosophy, business psychology. We work with authors, a variety of different thinkers, and we're working on the skills that we would say a range of professionals in the sort of broader sense need to really thrive well these days. So they're generally thinking skills like critical thinking, curiosity, strategic thinking, but also some of the other skills that make space where those thinking skills can really thrive. So for example, I did my PhD on the topic of trust, and we still work a lot on trust, which I wouldn't say that trust is a thinking skill, but we know that we don't think our best unless we feel safe. So a lot of times what we're trying to do is create the right environment for our brains to do what they're best at, and for all the sort of skill and experience of people that are working together to come out and not be inhibited. And so, I think with what I'm trying to do, I'm not a huge proponent of needing the history of philosophy in business. Sometimes in our sessions when we do training workshops and keynotes and things like that with businesses, we will reference people that the world would recognize as historical philosophers or something, but I'm not so concerned that people are able to quote Socrates or Simone de Beauvoir or someone. I'm much more concerned that people are able to think for themselves, exercise agency, have really constructive, positive debates. And so that's why I say it's not about sort of teaching the history of philosophy. It's about getting people to do philosophy. And maybe this goes to the point of your question of sort of why do we need that today, specifically in tech, why is it needed? And I think that goes right back to the etymology of the word philosophy. So, in the Greek, philo means love, Sophia means wisdom. And so when we're doing philosophy, we should be ideally pursuing wisdom. And I think wisdom is really salient right now. Wisdom is really needed because we're living and working at a time which is so fast-paced, something that is even more felt in the tech space, not only in tech, but certainly in tech. It's something we talk a lot about, pace and speed. And so there's a lot of pace, there's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of newness, right? And wisdom is this thing that, when you look up definitions of wisdom, it's a blend of experience, sort of know-how, knowledge, intelligence, but being able to go beyond the written rules to take what you've learned from that experience and apply it appropriately in that sort of balanced way, in a way that, like Aristotle would say, is not sort of excessive or deficient, to find the sort of virtue that's in the middle of ways of living. And I think tech really is where some of this is most pronounced. Though, I mean, I work with tech firms, but also law firms and creative agencies and a group of loads of different people. But I think within tech, there's so much complexity, so much newness, and we're sort of exploring new frontiers where we really need to be thinking our best, to be thinking carefully. I mean, ethics, the branch of philosophy that comes in hugely in this as well. So I'd say we need philosophy, in the context of work, because when you're doing new things, when you're challenging the status quo, we need to be able to slow down and make sure that we're really thinking carefully and doing that well, because you're creating opportunities for people that don't even know they existed, right? And so coming up with ways to do that are really well thought through because of all the power that's involved in the new sort of frontier working out that we're doing.
Yeah, it's so are you saying that we need wisdom even more now than before because of the fast pace change?
Yeah, I mean, maybe if I give you another example, there was a piece of work that was done by an academic named Keith Grint. He did it when he was at Warwick University. Now he's at Oxford, but he and his team were looking at the kinds of challenges that businesses are up against, and specifically leaders within businesses. And he found that there were three types of challenges: urgent ones, tame ones, and what he calls wicked problems, which is the sort of language that I'm sure many of the listeners have come across in recent years. But a wicked problem, that's a term that he borrowed from social planning research from the 1970s. But what he was using it to talk about was challenges that are characterized by high degrees of complexity and lots of uncertainty. And I think when you're going into sort of new areas, like, I don't know, let's say metaverse, for example, there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of complexity, and there's a lot of things that we maybe we haven't dealt with before. And what Grint and his team found was when you have a problem that's really urgent, or its chief characteristic is urgency, then an answer is right. So say the building's on fire, that's an urgent problem. We just want someone to give us an answer. Everyone go in that direction, whatever. When there's a tame problem, which is the kind of problem that's not necessarily urgent, but is one which you can just roll out a process or a policy for. So that's something we've dealt with before. That's great. But when you have a lot of complexity and uncertainty, what Grint found was that actually the last thing we should do is just give an answer. Instead, we need to ask questions and be curious and sort of try to dissect what's going on, because it's new, it's complex. And I just feel like that's the bulk of what we're dealing with these days. If there's things that have quick answers, we can probably get a piece of tech to do it for us. But where the really interesting stuff and the really important, where it's important to get like a human on the job, is probably some more of that gray area stuff where we need to be doing some of the creative thinking for ourselves. And that the suggestion is that requires a lot of critical thinking, questioning, curiosity. And I think that's where a lot of philosophy comes in to be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of new technologies, blockchain is maybe not new, but I think that it's still quite new from if you look at the history.
Yeah.
And like that is something that we don't know yet what it can be, right? But one of the things that blockchain is argued to be solved is trust.
Right.
And you have a PhD on the philosophy of trust, and you argue that it doesn't really solve trust.
Yeah.
So could you explain why? And could technology ever replace human trust?
Yeah. So I hope this isn't frustrating. I'll say yes, it could replace it, but not as a one-to-one replacement. And I'm probably in the camp of people that would say I'd be disappointed if blockchain replaced trust. so I'll come back to that, but maybe the bone that I pick with blockchain that you touched on, where, you know, as you say, I don't, I'm not hopeful that blockchain gets trust right. In fact, I'm critical of when I hear people talking about blockchain as a system of trust, as it often is. I don't think that's accurate use of language. And what I mean is, maybe if we just step back and say, you know, a little bit in terms of the basics of blockchain. So I know this isn't a conversation about sort of the nitty gritty of blockchain, but, you know, if we say that blockchain is this relationship of it's a network, right, where transactions are living in multiple places, so that you can't tamper with them and you can know what's going on for real, right? I mean, sort of in plain language, the appeal of blockchain is that you can't tamper with it. You can track what's going on, and you know, I can understand why people would say, well, it's a system of trust then, because no longer do I need to sort of worry about what's happened to, I don't know, my cryptocurrency or something. I can know that it's not, you know, there's a record of it, right? That is that's going to be true. And that's pretty appealing at a time where there's, you know, what counts as true is so debated in other areas of life. So when it comes to finance and blockchain, it's really nice and comforting to know that, well, at least we know what the transactions were. So I can understand why we would say that it's a system of trust, because it feels like something that we can trust. But the reason I say I think the language is not accurate in this instance is that blockchain doesn't enable trust. I think it enables reliance. And I think there's a significant difference between the two, which is useful and important to note. And actually, the thing that's powerful about human to human trust is something that I think we lose a bit when we take some of that language over to blockchain, which I don't think is taking anything away from blockchain. You know, I'm still a big fan of blockchain. I think it's great as a system for supporting reliance. I just don't think it gets that trust. And so the reason, just to sort of cut to the chase, is that blockchain enables us to feel safe about our transactions, but I think it takes away the very need for trust. So if I say, part of the, you know, say that I don't know, I'm trusting you to care for, I don't know, let's, you know, just to use a sort of analogous example, I leave some money with you, some like cash with you, right? And I'm entrusting my cash to you. I'm vulnerable to you letting me down. I'm vulnerable to you like actually betraying me with that cash and all those sorts of things. And on the one hand, I'm much more vulnerable if I leave my money with a human than if I leave my money in a blockchain sort of scenario. So on that one hand, the blockchain is a safer bet. I can rely on the blockchain more than maybe I can rely on a human. But the test for whether or not it's really trust or just reliance is, I think, whether or not I can be not just let down, but betrayed. Is there an opportunity for me to be where I can be so vulnerable that I'm actually betrayed? And I think the answer, you know, so say the sort of proponents of blockchain, is no. It's such a robust system. It's such a reliable system. No, you cannot be betrayed. And so I would say, well, therefore, I might feel really safe, you know, leaving my money in the system, but it doesn't enable me to trust, because trust is irrelevant in that context. Where I think trust is really interesting is when there is vulnerability, and it's not just a matter of, can I rely on you, but can I trust you to do what's beyond what we've already discussed? What, you know, I don't even know what situations might come up. So can I entrust something of value to you, and think that you're trustworthy to the point where you're not just going to sort of do what I think you would, but do the right thing, even if I don't know what's going to happen. Does this make sense? Like, I think there's something about the sort of agency that I think is really important for trust, that maybe is something more to unpack.
Yeah, I mean, I think about a love relationship, right? With the ultimate vulnerability, where you can be But you wouldn't replace love relationship with a blockchain, right? I'm just
Right.
like going completely off track now, but
Yeah.
it's definitely the human side of it that is a significant difference, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, I mean,
Mm.
some, you know, playing devil's advocate, uh, some people listening to our conversation might say, well, but Brennan, you're just, you're just dealing in semantics. Like when we say that blockchain is a system of trust, all we really mean is it's a system that you can trust, that's secure, right? That's kind of a lot of times how we use language around trust in everyday speaking. And I'm fine with that, and I agree with that. That's okay. Yes, probably when we say it's a system of trust, we mean we feel secure in it. But at the same time, I kind of want to say, oh, but that's a shame, like, because trust isn't just about feeling safe. So to the love relationship example, or even in like a collegial relationship at work or friends and things, the reason that we want to have people in our lives that we trust isn't just so that we never get burned. It's so that we have a greater sense of identity and belonging and connection, and that our projects become bigger when we collaborate and they expand with, it's so we could use the blockchain to enable greater collaboration, as many people have. I mean, look at the great movements towards equality, inclusivity, and around finance. I mean, how many people are able to get involved in investment because of blockchain that had no access to sort of more traditional banking, right? So it's really good, and I'm not opposed to blockchain, but I just don't think it's right to say that it is a system of trust, because it actually removes some of it. Much in the same way, maybe another good example is like a contract, right? So we have contracts specifically where power goes beyond our reasonable, expectations for trustworthiness, right? So I have contracts with, I don't know, clients or various people that where our engagement reaches beyond what we should be able to know about each other or something, right? Like it supports us, particularly almost, this sounds a bit dark, but almost because we don't trust each other or can't trust each other, right? So if we're saying here's an area where it just feels like there's so much at stake, we don't want to just leave it down to trust. So we're going to make it really clear in writing. I think that's where blockchain is. There's so much power these days globally around finance that we don't just want to leave that to human error or human, malicious intent. And so let's siphon that off and put it over here in a closed system that is completely trackable. That's great. I'm not against contracts. I'm not against blockchain, but I don't think that they do the work of trust. They step in where trust has its limitations. But where trust is really powerful and beautiful is when it comes to sort of enrichment at a human relationship level that adds meaning and identity and belonging to our lives.
Yeah, and I think that from a bit more technical perspective, so what I've understood is that what blockchain is really doing, and now I might use the word trust again, anyways, is through something called the Dunbar's number. So I think that is a very, very good way to explain the mechanism of what blockchain is doing. And so the Dunbar's number is the so-called suggested cognitive limit of the number of people of whom we can maintain stable social relationships with. So meaning the number of people we can trust in our lives.
Sure.
And then it's estimated to be somewhere around 150. That can be debatable. So what then essentially is the saying is that, okay, so about 150 people we can trust and make business with in our lives, but it's argued then that blockchain can go beyond this, and that we can trust and organize ourselves and our societies to do more and trust more people in a secure way. And this is what is argued to enable more opportunities in our societies. What do you say? Could you explain this? Like, what does this mean for you in a society?
Yeah. So I think it's really exciting, but it's also, I don't know, it's exciting. I'm going to try to stay positive because I think it is exciting. But the reason I say I'm going to try to stay positive is because there's an opportunity, I think, for us to say, well, blockchain can extend Dunbar's number, and therefore expand the number of people we can truly connect with. And I'm not sure that it can quite do that, but I'm staying positive by saying it enables us to carve out and more clearly understand the role of close proximate relationships versus those that are cultivated via something like blockchain. For example, if we say that we could previously do business with up to 150 people, based on the hypothesis of Dunbar's number, then blockchain enables that number to increase insofar as the styles or modes of interaction, you could say, with those ever increasing numbers are primarily transactional. Yes, I can transact with a lot more people, and that's really positive. For example, as we mentioned a moment ago, the number of people globally who have access to funding who didn't before, that's incredibly positive. How I tend to think about Dunbar's number, though, is in terms not just of transactional interaction, but in terms of otherwise meaningful interactions, right? So the number of people that we can have close relationships with. For blockchain to extend that, we still need to learn quite a lot about the people interacting in the blockchain, right? So I could learn quite a lot about someone who I've never met face to face, whether that's in person or virtually or anything. But I suppose if I study the style of transactions or the types of things they tend to invest in on a blockchain, I can get to know quite a lot about them, right? I mean, there's how much can we tell about a person's spending habits? Quite a lot these days, right? So we can get to know people that way, but I've got to do quite a bit more work to develop a robust, what I might call a robust relationship that's beyond transaction. So where I think blockchain enables Dunbar's number to grow in a really positive way, it's in interactions which are primarily valuable because they're transactional. And sorry, just to add on that, the thing where I think it's really positive is it says we can offload those types of transactions, which are really valuable and really important, over here, and then recognize, okay, other types of interactions that we want to have that are not primarily transactional, like the love relationship or other types of things that you mentioned. We have a different way of thinking about those, I suppose.
But I still found it interesting. You were saying that you could extend the relationships that you don't have a close one with. So what you're saying is that because maybe the power of just like getting the data in front of you, that you could still, again, I guess it's comparing, maybe if you do a lot of research about the person, then maybe you trust the person because like, okay, this seems like a legit one to make business with, but you can scale it quicker. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm not sure if it's quicker. It's farther reaching for sure. Right. So definitely blockchain enables us to do transactions, to do business in that sense with people that we never would have had access to in terms of quantity and breadth, in terms of geographical reach. But for me to get to, and going back to what we said before around blockchain being a system of reliability and security, though I would say not necessarily trust, from the start, there's baked into blockchain, there's this element of reliance. So because of blockchain, I have an exponential, pretty quick, increase in number of people that I can rely on. Or actually, I mean, I would want to sort of clean that up even a little bit more and say, am I really relying on the people? I'm relying on the blockchain, right? So it's not that I'm relying on the people, but I'm relying on the blockchain, which is another reason why I want to say it's not really, I'm not trusting the people. I don't think I'm trusting the blockchain. I'm relying on the blockchain because, as far as I understand it, the blockchain doesn't have agency. So it's going to do what we expect it to do, right? And it makes it very reliable. It doesn't set it up to betray me. And so I think it's better to say it's reliance than trust. But to come back to your point, if I get to know the way that people transact and invest in things, I might say, oh, look, this person who I only know through their handle, I recognize that that's I guess, an individual, right? I might, come to know their investment habits and things, and that might show me something of their values and these sorts of things. But it takes quite a bit of work still to get to a place where I can go, I think I can actually trust that person and add them to my Dunbar number, if that makes sense. So I can rely on the system. There's a lot of security in it, but how quickly it enables us to expand beyond the people that we can rely, like really do trustworthy business with, I'm not quite so sure. In terms of speed. And to that point that I almost I almost tripped myself up on a moment ago. It might, for all I know, maybe the being behind that handle isn't an individual, or maybe it's a group, I don't know, which highlights the degree to which there's a lot of security. And kind of, for me to do business in the blockchain, I don't need to know if they're an individual or whatever, because it's so secure. But the transaction's still safe. But surely that means I don't trust them. I just rely on the system.
Yeah. Gotcha. And so what people are talking mostly about with blockchain is that the biggest opportunity is decentralization. And I think that I heard a TED talk about this, but from a historical point of view, we have been decentralized throughout history most of the time. We've been mostly living in communities. Back in the days, organizing ourselves from a small community perspective. But then a few centuries ago, it was 500 years, I don't remember how many years ago, but then we started centralizing ourselves and organizing in a new way. But what the blockchain is supposed to open up a new opportunity to decentralize ourselves again, kind of combining the best of two worlds in a way, I guess. But what does what does this mean? What are the benefits of this, would you say? And what do you think that the ancient philosophers would have said about decentralization and blockchain?
That's a really good, interesting, fascinating question. A couple of things come to mind that are a little bit out there, but I'll share them anyway, because hopefully it'll be at some level interesting, and I hope spark something for others that are listening to go further. But first of all, talking about ancient thinkers, a lot of ancient philosophers, at least in, so I primarily study Western philosophy. And actually, this is something that's different from, say, Eastern philosophy, where you see a lot more emphasis on decentralization. But when you look at ancient Western philosophy, you have some pretty, lauded throughout history proponents of centralization, right? Like Plato, the ancient Greek thinker, where, there's a 20th century philosopher named Willard Van Orman Quine, W.V. Quine, who said that all of Western philosophy is basically a series of footnotes back to Plato. So making the case that Plato is pretty central. And Plato argued for there being a pretty centralized, a philosopher king, right? Saying that we should have states that are run by philosophers, which I try not to shout too much about, because I don't know that that's really right. That's a good move. But then you could also look at, even moving more through history, the 18th century philosopher Jeremy Bentham. He, famous for utilitarian moral philosophy, but talked about designed the panopticon, right? This approach to a prison where you have a very centralized, there's one guard stood in the middle of this sort of architectural, structure, with all the prison sort of cells facing into the center, such that the inmates never know when the prison guard is watching them, and so they sort of feel watched all the time. So I mean, there's some pretty kind of scary examples, I think, throughout the history of ideas of centralization. And at the same time, you do have voices of proponents of decentralization. For example, my mind goes to Epicurus, again another ancient Greek thinker who was talked about associating happiness and well-being to the collective, right? So having one of the first sort of communes and having things in common. But I think the issue, this is going to be too general, but the issue with centralization and the value of decentralization is not where power sits, but with the fallibility of those who have the power, right? So a central, when the downside of centralized power is that it's pretty hard to find an example of a human that's held all the power and managed that really well and not become corrupt or something like that. So the value of decentralized power is that we're spreading things out and there's a lot more accountability, and if anything goes wrong, it's there's not as much at stake and we can all work together, and that's really good, and there's a lot more equality baked into the system and everything. And so
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
so that's really good, but at the same time, again, I don't know, I feel like maybe it's the time of day. You've caught me sort of in a negative mood, but I'm going to try to stay positive. But I think there's with decentralization, have we solved for fallibility? Well, usually when I hear people talk about decentralized things, I'm on board and I like that, but they're not saying that they've solved for human fallibility. But I suppose baked into the system is that, right? You might say, well, no, we're still fallible, and that's why we're spreading things out. We're sort of hedging our bets by decentralizing. So anyway, I'm sort of regressing a little bit, but the point that I want to make with hopefully all of this is that I think when we talk about decentralizing, that is positive because it bakes in some checks and balances, right? I think that the history of philosophy is not necessarily the place to go for a magic bullet or one-stop answer for these things, because you've got a lot of messed up people trying to think well. And I mean, that's kind of like what I would say is the story of humanity, right? And so that which is another reason that with the work that I do with businesses, with philosophy at work, I'm not always championing particular philosophers because they're human too. What we're championing is the pursuit of careful thinking and wisdom. And so, we want to stand on the shoulders of people like Socrates, but we want to not sort of hold them up too highly, right? Because they're still people. And so, so anyway, all that to say, I don't think that the history of philosophy is the place to look for sort of all the answers, but you do lift out some really helpful ways of questioning, modes of questioning. And so when we think about whether or not it's valuable to decentralize and things, well, that's good. But I guess what I'm saying with blockchain, that's it's helpful to decentralize the power when it comes to finance. But I guess what I'm just cautious of is that's not sufficient. It's perhaps a necessary and important condition for financial global health or something like that. But it's not going to be the whole story, because there still is there's still going to be problems. I guess, to be pessimistic again. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think a lot of interesting reflections there, in a way that I haven't heard it before. So yeah, the human fallibility. I guess also what happens usually is that you solve a problem, but then you always get a new something new that rise of it that you couldn't what do you call it, forecast, right? That you couldn't predict.
Right. Yeah.
So you will always get new problems that you have to manage, right?
Yeah.
And then that's just a matter of finding the least bad way to organize ourselves, right?
Yeah, and you know, I mean, blockchain looks like a pretty good step in the right direction, right? Because if I'm saying that look out for human fallibility, then you could say, well, hey, you know, blockchain does a pretty good job because it's taken a lot of human error out of it, arguably all of it, right? So it's a closed system that's transactionally, you know, sound. But I guess what I'm just wanting to say is let's make sure that we continue thinking critically along the way, because maybe blockchain solves for some things, but we're going to find new areas that we hadn't really realized before, but were problematic, and you know, equally opportunities as well. And so it's not enough to say, well, do you know what, we've got the tech sorted. I mean, similarly, at the start of, you know, in like 2 years ago, basically this week, right, when there were a lot of lockdowns kicking off and things around COVID and the global pandemic, I was working with quite a few companies where I was hearing this sort of view that no one was coming out and saying this, but it was like they were implying that, well, we've solved the tech issue. Everyone's at home in their home office. They've all got some kind of platform account so we can communicate and have meetings virtually and stuff. We've sort of set up the tech, and so we're sorted. But then what we found throughout the last 2 years was that's the first step, but actually a lot of the like human stuff. How do you collaborate? How do you trust each other? How do you think creatively together? All of that still needed some more solutions. And in the same way, just as having the tech that enables a home office is not sufficient for really excellent, effective productivity for teams, distributed teams, so too, I don't think having just the tech solution of blockchain is sufficient for financial global well-being. We have to be thinking creatively and critically and staying engaged, and we need everyone to remain curious in the most constructive way, I guess.
Yeah, no easy solution. There's no bullet solution, right?
No, but I mean, maybe to on a happy note, I think yes, you're right. There's no one easy solution, but I think the recipe, if it doesn't give us a clear answer, but there is one. It's not an easy solution, but one solution that seems clear is like, if you imagine, I mean, just take like, for example, a tech company or a community, right? Geographical sort of community. There might not be an easy answer, but if all the members of that team within the tech firm or the village or whatever felt supported and empowered enough to that their view would be considered seriously, that if they ask a question that someone deems to be a silly question, they're not going to be shamed. You know, if they all felt respected enough to share their ideas and ask their questions, to critique each other in a way that was supportive, rather than sort of this like dog eat dog competition. Surely that is the magic bullet. I mean, it's not a one size fits all kind of thing, but if you say whatever the future holds, we're going to get through it by having a collective discussion of people trying to find, navigate through the complexity by engaging their brains and all their experience and wisdom they bring. I think that's how we're going to do it. The actual solutions to it are going to be unique to each challenge. But it's not right to say that it's a magic bullet, but I think it's a recipe that I'm pretty hopeful of.
A direction, what to strive for, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, and with your business, Philosophy at Work, you teach the skills that you believe professionals need to thrive today or in the future. So, in particular in the tech industry, where we're paving the way with new technologies, what skills do you think that in particular tech that are the most important at this time?
Yeah, that's a fun one. So I mean, some of the ones that we've been seeing add the most value to the tech firms that we're working with are things around self-awareness, curiosity, and psychological safety. So some of the trust stuff that we've been talking about. So self-awareness, because so much has been said that human subjectivity is a key thing to be aware of and consider, whether or not we're talking about bias or just the values that we're baking into apps and algorithms and things. And so the better able that, and it's not just tech, but within tech, the better able we are to spot where we're to spot the interplay between our own subjectivity and object, as close as we can come to something that is objective. That's really, really helpful because we're just that bit faster to catch assumptions. But then also curiosity sort of links right into that. One of the things that we do in our workshops on curiosity is help people understand the different ways that curiosity can show up, and so they can identify their own strengths in curiosity and work out their own practice of asking the kinds of questions that are going to help them draw out what they need from other clients and colleagues and things. And a theme that always comes up through that is empathy. So curiosity that shows up as empathy, where we're not just curious about the work or the world, but curious about each other, curious about what each other thinks. And I think that's got to be a good thing for every business, but surely for tech as well, in particular. And that's what we're seeing. If for the reason that I don't know, particularly if we're working with, say, groups of engineers, to cultivate the understanding across a really diverse group of people, where they can use their really high intelligence and expertise and translate that well across different areas of the business is really key. And then the other thing I said was trust and psychological safety. And I think that just comes in because, from my own experience, the tech businesses that I'm working with, some of them are sort of the sort of big, well-established ones, but a lot of them are sort of scale-up size. And when that's happening, there's the speed is just off the charts. And so when you're onboarding so many people and trying to cultivate the kind of culture that's going to help the business be sustainable, it's really important that you think about trust and psychological safety and helping people feel appreciated and respected in it. So those, and that's not just for sort of leaders. We need that to be throughout for it to really work. So that's why those things of self-awareness, curiosity, trust, and psychological safety come to mind for me when I think about tech.
Yeah, I come from the hyper-growth company, so I know exactly what you're talking about. But
yeah.
no, well, I'm particularly curious about the self-awareness part. Like, how would you actually go about to? I mean, the curiosity and you hear curiosity and psychology safety a lot more. That like corporations want to work on them, but self-awareness, how do you actively work on that?
Yeah, like what can you do? Because
you're right. Exactly.
Self-awareness, self-awareness is notoriously difficult to cultivate. It almost feels like something about human consciousness just makes it hard, right, to do, because we're always looking through our own subjective lenses. So what we do in sessions is we do exercises that help people identify their own personal values, and then connect those to the values of, the stated values, at least, of the team or department or areas of, businesses, whatever. So that through the dialogue of not just identifying those personal values, but then trying to critically examine the linkage between their personal values and the corporate ones, they come to better understand them. And that starts more of an awareness and understanding of, oh, here's where my values kind of might show up. And the more that we practice that, the quicker we are to say, oh, I think this is right, but maybe that's my subjective lens, and so it's we're not it's too much of an uphill battle, and I don't think it's possible to try to reduce our subjectivity. But what we can, well, to an extent, we're reducing it by increasing our awareness of what's going on, but we're not going to change the fact that we have, nor is it always what we want to do to try to change the fact that we have values and all these things. That's why we want to hire diversely, because we want everyone in the room to have diversity of thought, different backgrounds, all kinds of really enriching things. We want those values and differences to really shine, but the more we're aware of it is helpful. And so through the exercise, like I mentioned, but then also there's a one thing that we do that is a suggestion for out of the session, because it just takes time, and this is, I have to name check Tasha Ulrich. She's a researcher who focuses on self-awareness and talks a lot about this. But the fact that you can't, when it comes to cultivating self-awareness, it's hard to beat feedback from others. And so the idea is that we encourage people that we work with to have a thinking partner within the business. So someone that they go on the journey with, they get to know each other quite well, and come to that place after, also working on trust and some of the stuff we talked about, where they can say, hey, this is how I think, this is how I'm seeing the situation. Do you think I think I'm good at this. Do you think that's right? Have I got that right? Or is it something else? Because what Ulrich says is the best way to cultivate self-awareness is to get feedback from people that you trust. Mm-hmm. Because I can say, well, I think I see, I see this project in this way, but maybe that's just me. What do you think? And you sort of start to see some of that. The other thing is we work with people to use some mapping techniques where we're doing what I call a neural map, where we're getting some of it's almost like via a word association method, but down on paper. We're getting people to think about a concept and then map the connections in their brain between that concept and other things that come to mind for them, as a way of better understanding some of the way their knowledge map, you could say, in their brain. So that if I say, well, what do I, if you asked me to be, what do I think about decentralization? I could tell you something that I think is what I think about it. But if I do one of these maps, then other things will come to mind. Other things will pop into my mind that I'll write down. And I might go, that seems bizarre to me. Surely that's not relevant to decentralization. But if I just don't self-edit and I write it down and then I populate this whole map, the argument is that, well, if that thing came to mind when I was thinking about decentralization, then somehow it's associated in my brain. Now, it's not a perfect science. It might be that it comes to mind because I just had this chat with you about that or something. But it's an interesting experiment to say, what comes to mind that might suggest some interesting things running in the background for me, and therefore help me to go, oh, okay, I thought that my thinking was like this, but actually there's other things are there. What do I think about the hypothesis of that telling me something about myself? So we do some sort of interesting creative experiments and exercises with people to help them just get a little bit more curious about understanding themselves, so that they're that little bit faster during a project or meeting or whatever to come to the place of going, oh, is this what I would say? Is this really true, or is this just me?
To overcome your own biases.
Yeah. If not overcome them, see them, see them a bit more. Yeah.
But you're working with people at work, but this is extremely powerful in life in general, right? It's,
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for today. It's been great to have you here. Learning a lot more about philosophy, and it's been some good reflections. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Mira. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, and I love what you're doing.
That's it for today. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it. And if you want to read up more about the guest, then you can go to the show notes to get all of the links. And also, if you like this episode, please don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter to never miss the latest episode. Thank you for today. See you in the next episode.